you're calculating the estimated cost of this proposal, are you assuming that you're able to fund the full award for all who apply and are eligible?
Correct. It also assumes that we are leaving some of the flexibility that we've implemented this year. This year, we implemented the ability for students to not enroll fall term. So we've done a fall term waiver for that enrollment. And so we've had additional students pick up by starting winter or spring terms. And this model would also allow for that.
Right. I think what I was trying to clarify is that the additional cost is related to issues in addition to simply increasing the award amount.
Correct.
Okay. Thanks.
This second model is also a tiered cost of tuition and fees model. So the difference is that it's not covering the cost of books and supplies. It is still awarding students a full coverage of cost and tuition and fees up to a 2,000 EFC at their respective institution. This is still using that 15 credit load per term per academic year estimate for those 2023-24 age year and 24-25 age year. Again, award amounts are tiered and stepped down by 15% per EFC range. This model does include awarding up to a 10,000 EFC. Sorry, I want to make sure I'm covering everything I wanted to cover on this one. Going back to what we talked about, this OOG currently provides funding to more than 40,000 students, resident students each year, and this would be expanding who is receiving it, and additionally providing state aid to a group that's currently experiencing a gap between their available financial resources and the cost of attendance. Something to consider as well is that with the right OOG award amounts, we might be able to trigger enrollment increases for the highest need students while we're providing higher award amounts for students at the lowest income and have increased the EFC cap for the 2022-23 OOG awarding. The amount is likely not enough to create a significant breakthrough in enrollment levels. So just keeping that in mind as well as we increase how much we are able to provide students and support, that we might have more and more students attending school. And again, that would reflect in that cost estimate. This particular model is a little bit less because it does not cover the books and supplies expense. And this would cost roughly $509 million to $628.5 million above CSL. And then the final model that we have that I'm working on with OOG is a combined OPG-OOG model. It combines the last model we just reviewed, the tiered OOG award for cost of tuition and fees, and it's designed so that pipeline students who are in their senior year of high school and are planning to attend college or university immediately after graduation would receive either the OOG or the OPG. Instead of receiving a combination of the OOG and OPG, this system would determine which is the higher grant award of the two grants and display that award to the student and to the schools. Pipeline students in the EFC ranges of 6,001 and above at community colleges and the EFC ranges of 10,001 and above at the four-year institutions would receive the Oregon Promise Grant. That's because the Oregon Promise Grant is a higher award amount for those two groups than the OOG would be. By providing a substantial OOG award amount for the lowest income students, we would provide more grant aid than they're currently receiving from OOG and OPG in today's model. The estimated investment needed above CSL for OOG for this particular model would again be that $509 million, between that and $628.5 million. And Like we talked about, all of these models do include flexibility such as no FAFSA filing deadline, no fall term enrollment requirement. We were able to disperse OOG to an additional 2,805 students this year already because of the fall term waiver requirement. That does not even include the students who are enrolled for spring term. We're still collecting that disbursement data, but I wanted to call that out, that flexibility is impacting students today. So being able to continue that would be important. And then I'm going to pass it off to Kyra.
Thanks, Erin. For the record, my name is Kyra King. I'm the State Grants Administrator of the Oregon Promise Grant and the ORSA application. Madam Chair, members of the Commission, for this model, Oregon Promise would kick in, as Erin said, after the Oregon Opportunity Grant award amount was less than what Oregon Promise could offer at the EFC ranges. So the grayed out ones are what Oregon Promise would start at. So over 6,000 for community colleges and over 10,000 for the 4-year. Here, this is where the award amount, which is the average cost of community college tuition in the state, are the award amounts for the Oregon Promise Grant. So all these students at the kind of grayed out EFC ranges would be getting that cost, kind of a max award. There'd be no minimum award of Oregon Promise in this model, since we're not serving the lowest income students and we're not second dollar to OOG or Pell in this model, since there's no Pell eligibility here as well. Also, part of this includes the reforms of expanding to the universities and not counting accelerated learning credits. So those costs are in this model, which is here it kind of balances out on head count. Oregon Promise would kind of be serving the same amount of students in this model, even with the expansion to the university, since we're no longer paying for students with a lower EFC limit. So our head count stays the same even with this expansion, because, as Erin said, the majority of students who file a FAFSA ORSA are in that 0 EFC range. Also in this model, we talked about the tuition equity requirement that ORSA students must meet to be eligible for the Oregon Opportunity Grant. In this model, we'd have that go away, because if we had it, then Oregon Promise would also have to pay, regardless of the EFC, for ORSA students who fall under the pipeline criteria, because with Oregon Promise, we do not have the tuition equity requirement currently, nor I don't think we'd have it in the future. So regardless, we'd have to pick up those ORSA students. There's not many, but we would have to have additional costs to make sure we could cover them, regardless of what their EFC was, low or high. I think that's all my notes for this one. And so it'd be about 18 million above the current service level for Oregon Promise in that model. Any questions on the Oregon Promise piece of the combined model? If not, I can move on to the reform. Commissioner Hayman.
Yeah, thanks so much, Chair Rowe. Quick question. I noticed that you chose not to include the removal of the 2.0 GPA in the calculations for Oregon Promise. I just wondered what was the rationale for that. I noticed that it's listed as possible reforms going forward.
Mm-hmm. It is a great question, Commissioner. It's a recent one of our newest line items for reforms, and so I don't have a cost for it yet. We're waiting for some data to be able to better estimate. In future models that you'll see, you'll have that included. Just I don't have the numbers yet.
I appreciate that. I just especially appreciated Juan's initial introduction, mm-hmm. and I think his comments on who would benefit from removing that 2.0 GPA requirement, and I guess I'd like to keep that in mind.
Yes, agreed. And regardless of the numbers I get, I know the cost won't be as large. Since we already have lowered the GPA to 2.0, there isn't as many students kind of left in the model that are being excluded, regardless of their GPA. And also the cost may not be as much, since in the current model, they may be low-income students pursuing community college. So in the current model, they'd be a minimum award student. Commissioner Gillard.
Oh, thank you, Kyra. The question I had was, the previous sheet or previous page, I mean, was showing how much over CSL, both Oregon Promise as well as the Oregon Opportunity Grant would be. Is that if the same FAFSA filers had that dollar amount possibility and they would have taken advantage of it, then that cost, and for example, last year would have been, or 2 years ago, 709 million versus 200 million? Trying to figure.
So our cost is looking at both the increase in tuition costs. So there's kind of an inflation that goes along with projecting for the next biennium, and then also trying to estimate some of our head counts. I will say we're playing an educated guessing game when it comes to our projections. But yeah, your assessment is correct.
I was trying to also see if you would answer, well, that's if every graduating senior of Oregon high schools went to college, but it's not that, is it?
No. So my models do not assume I'm going to pay every single student. This is based on our what we've seen kind of it in the pandemic and pre-pandemic. So I use usually a 3-year average in my numbers to kind of get that flow of students. We did see a big decrease in the pickup rate for 2020 and just the participation overall in 2021 for fall. But 2019 was Oregon Promise's biggest year. So I still keep that in my projection in case there is a little bit of a bump. So this is not assuming all 30,000, 40,000 high school graduates in Oregon would be receiving Oregon Promise. This is based on kind of current application rates with a little bump and some estimates based on the pandemic as best we can.
Okay, so if everyone that could have taken advantage of the Oregon Opportunity Grant, those FAFSA filers that you have in the lower left there, had they done that, then that cost would have been 828 million versus 200 million. Just trying to get the explanation.
Yeah, so the OOG numbers are a little bit different than my numbers. So mine are only kind of the grade ones.
Sorry. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. So for OOG, it's a little bit different because that's only based on who's submitting that FAFSA ORSA. And that also in those levels, you're combining the pipeline and non-pipeline. So our traditional students and adult learners who are eligible today for the Oregon Opportunity Grant, I would still only be paying for eligible Oregon Promise students at or above those EFC limits.
Yeah, and if they had those full awards that were explained in the prior 2 pages. Got it. Okay, thank you.
Of course.
Any other questions at this point? Thank you. Go ahead, Kara.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'll go to the last page. And so this model here is if Oregon Promise kind of stays how it is and we get the reforms we were looking for, which was House Bill 2093 in the 2021 session. And so that's the box to the right that we see some of those reforms. The box to the left is if nothing happens to Oregon Promise for the 23-25 biennium and we continue as is and kind of see maybe a little bit of an increase in some participation, and obviously our award amounts would go up based on the cost of tuition. And so that box, you see that we would remain at CSL if nothing happens to Oregon Promise and we just continue as is. However, if we do pursue these reforms that we want, which is expanding the Oregon Promise to qualified students that enroll at the public universities and the private nonprofit institutions, and change the eligibility from counting credits to terms. This also removes counting the accelerated learning credits. And again, removing the GPA requirement is not in this cost model, but again, it would not be a significant increase in dollars. So what you're seeing is that expansion and removing of the credits. And this is based on some data that we've got from HEC's Research and Data Department on kind of who we think might be getting these dollars at the institution, at the public universities. So we're looking at students who do apply for Oregon Promise, because we do get a lot of applicants, and those students just decide to go to a university, even though we have said, hey, you'll get money to go to a community college. They choose to go to a university anyway. So that calculation looks at who we would just award that's already in our system, plus who kind of fits the eligibility criteria that just goes to a university already. And that's kind of how we got that calculation in our numbers. And the award amount would not change regardless of where the student goes, a community college or a four-year school. They're still getting an award amount based on the average cost of community college tuition in Oregon. The removal of counting accelerated learning credits is a weird one to tell you how much it costs, but here I go. In the 23-25 model, you actually don't see a number in there because this cost, it comes at the tail end of a student's participation because they be there longer. We no longer, cut off a term or two or even half because students can get a lot of accelerated learning credits in high school, depending on where they go in the state and what kind of feeder colleges are connected to their high school. So it's about 3.6 million per cohort. So every time a new cohort starts, we might see this cost towards the end because some students will just stick around and use that Oregon Promise dollar. How I kind of calculate it is a slow burn, cut it into thirds based on community college terms, and just kind of put it in there. So it's a $0 investment for the 23-25 biennium, but in the 25-27 biennium, we would start to feel the cost because the students would still be around picking up those dollars. And obviously, we'd be serving more students with the university expansion. More students would stick around by no longer discounting those credits. It's almost like starting another Oregon Promise program by expanding to the university. So our head count could significantly increase, which is why the cost does increase. But the award amount doesn't, like OOG does a tiered model. So we don't feel a bigger cost for those students. And hopefully that all made sense and I can take any questions.
Any other questions at this point? Okay, are our invited guests ready?
Nancy Drummond, Jim Brooks, Ryan, Maggie.
Not sure what order you want us to go in on.
Go ahead and start, Jim. Thanks.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Chair Cross, Vice Chair Rowe, Commissioners. For the record, my name is Jim Brooks. I serve as Associate Vice President for Student Services Enrollment Management and Director of Financial Aid at the University of Oregon. Thanks for the opportunity to share a little bit around financial aid.
Excuse me 1 minute, Dr. Brooks. Juan, could you stop sharing your screen if we don't need it now, please?
Excellent.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Thanks for the opportunity to share a little bit around financial aid and thinking about it from the perspective of a four-year public. First, I'll say I certainly enjoy being a part of the Student Aid Advisory Group with my colleagues from the Office of Student Access and Completion and other schools around the state. I think it's great that we get together and talk about the needs of Oregonians and how we can impact student enrollment, student success from a financial perspective. Looking not just at what's happening now and what may be happening next year, but looking even further down the road and then planning for those things. I think back to one of the things that Director Baez-Arevalo said initially is around affordability. And if I think about the students that we serve at the University of Oregon, that is always an ongoing concern. Financial aid and paying for college. I think in the state of Oregon, we've done a really good job as compared to some of the other states where I've worked. We've done a really good job of trying to stay on top of this, but we're still lagging. And some of the things that I think we're seeing in the proposal, the framework that Director Bias out of Allo shared, help address some of the concerns that we have there. When I think about University of Oregon students, the majority of them are going to school using a combination of federal aid, state aid, institutional aid, and federal aid is a huge part of it. But if you start looking at federal aid, it's heavily loans. You're looking at probably at our campus somewhere around 24 to 25 million in federal aid that is not loan based. And so of our 170 million or so of federal aid, a lot of it is student loans, and our students are working hard to try and maintain affordability. We as an institution are working hard on trying to make sure that we continue to support Oregonians and to make sure the neediest Oregonians are able to enroll at the University of Oregon. As I think about financial aid, transparency to me is a huge thing. And we've talked about that a little bit as we look at these programs. How do we make sure that we take some of the complication around financial aid off the table? And so that our Oregonians start thinking about it early on. You want students thinking about post-secondary education long before their senior year of high school. And as complicated as things are, it can be very off-putting. And so when I look at some of the things we're talking about now, and then the tiered approach and creating a program that covers needs, something that our Oregonians can look at early on and say, this is what this means to me. This helps me as I think about things, as I go through high school and think about where I want to be and what I want to do. I know what possibilities exist, because that's something we want our students thinking about very early on. We don't want them waiting until their senior year and then frantically trying to figure it out. As I think back over the last few years, I mean, we've done a lot of work with the Oregon Opportunity Grant for the four-year publics, and I was looking through some old numbers. If I think back to maybe 4 years ago, we've increased the grant about 46% over that time. So we've made quite a bit of headway there. I think some of the great things we've done this year is expanding to I should say, for 22-23 is expanding to non-Pell eligible students. That's incredible. That I think goes a long way. I think that the work we've done with undocumented students and serving undocumented students has been great as well. We still have a ways to go though. If I start looking at numbers and I start looking at where Pell will be next year, and even with our largest Oregon Opportunity Grant, it puts us at somewhere around $11,500 in gift aid to students. You saw the figures that were shared around where average tuition and fees are. And so we're still trailing in that respect. And I look at the programs and the proposal that's in front of you, the framework that's there, and I can see us making up a lot of that ground, especially if we start looking at what we could do with larger grants and what students would be able to do with larger grants. In the last couple of years, we've been able to subsidize some things thanks to some of the HERF funds that the federal government has given us. And for all the angst they may have brought us at times, they certainly helped our students and helped us make it through. But those are going away. And so as we head into the fall, that's something we want to be thinking about. How do we maintain programs that contribute to not just access, but success? We don't want students to start and then lose them along the way. We want them to maintain. We want them to go all the way through. And so how do we do that? And what do we need to do that? I mean, there's some questions that are on the framework of things we'll be thinking about as our committee continues to work on this. We see too often students who start and can't complete. And so we want to take some of that issue off the table. I always remember when I started in financial aid, my first director, who became my mentor, my first boss, said to me, here's something simple to always remember as a financial aid administrator. If you keep this in the back of your mind and build everything around this, you will be successful. And she said, it's trite, it's simple, but don't forget it. And I've never forgotten it all the years I've worked in aid. She said, always remember that students don't come to college to apply for financial aid. You want to be there, you want to support them, but you don't want it to be something that they have to focus on, that they have to work on, that they're putting a lot of energy into. And so I think as we grow programs and we think about making our programs more supportive and more straightforward and more transparent, we do that. We make it easier for students to focus on what we want them to do, which is to enroll, to do well, to graduate, and to go out and impact our state and impact our world. And so when I look at some of the restructuring that we're doing here in the framework, I think the tiered approach is great. It's something I've wanted for a while. I think we need to serve the neediest Oregonians better than we've been able to do, and the tiered approach helps us do that. Being inclusive, being clear, being transparent about award limits, things like that, promoting persistence and completion. To me, those are really important things. And I think that the framework that we're looking at will get us closer to that point. It may not get us all the way, but we will make a big step. And so as I serve on the advisory committee and work with our Office of Student Access and Completion colleagues on this, I'm pleased at what we've done. And I'm pleased that we're having the opportunity to share this with you, and I look forward to our continuing work as we refine this further and work to better support our Oregonians. Thank you.
Thank you. Juan, who's next? You're muted.
Madam Chair, I don't know how many times this has happened in the last 2 or plus years of COVID that, been in these conferences, and I mute my button and then I forget to unmute it and I start to speak.
We all do.
I was just asking Mr. Ryan West if he would like to proceed. He's the Director of Financial Aid from Chemeketa Community College. And then Maggie Gates, if you could follow from the Oregon Student Association.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks for the opportunity to be here and speak with you. I'm shared Jim's remarks. It's been fun to be part of this Oregon Student Access Subcommittee and Advisory Committee. I'm in my 20th year of Oregon financial aid, so I've seen different iterations of Oregon financial aid policy and followed the Oregon Opportunity Grant for many years, and I'm excited to see the investments we have currently and what could be on the horizon. A couple of my thoughts, both from just the broad financial aid community and from community colleges specifically, is one of the things that we really need for Oregon financial aid to really connect with students is some stability and predictability. The Oregon Promise program, when it was created, had that potential. And then quickly, when state resources didn't really live up to the expenses of the program, we found ourselves in this position where every other year we were cutting people off. And so whatever we do moving forward, we need to have some ability for students to expect it, like Jim said, before their senior year. So they need to be knowing as an 8th grader, a freshman, a sophomore, that something will be there for them, and not have us go out as financial aid administrators each fall. And in October, I'm telling people, well, we may or may not have Oregon Promise next year. Let's all just move forward as if we do, and we'll hope for the best. And so we need programs that have a better stable funding than what we typically have in Oregon's sort of boom bust economy. I'm the most excited that I've been in many years about the financial aid packages we have for this next year because of the investments that we've seen in Oregon financial aid. But I've been around long enough to know that it never lasts as long as I want it to last. And so I do worry that while we're able to serve students with an $8,000 EFC this year, if next year when I'm sending out their financial aid package, it's back to loans only, what that will do for their continued enrollment in school. So somehow, of course, I get to just, I guess, be here pointing out problems because I don't have any solutions. But stability and predictability for some of these financial aid programs are super important. And then I would just echo what the OSAC staff has shared about flexibility. The removal of the fall term enrollment requirement was hugely beneficial, specifically to community college students. I think probably to students everywhere, but if we really want to achieve 40-40-20 in the state, we need to have more openings for people to begin their education than one portal each year being only fall. There's just too many different things that could come up in the lives of students. And for them to miss that fall enrollment, and then you don't get an opportunity grant for the entire year, even if you could come winter, spring, and summer, is just not something that's really helpful for students. And maybe they won't re-enroll if we tell them, come back in another year. The last thing I would maybe add here is the best thing, in my opinion, that came from the Oregon Promise Grant was financial aid in the form of grant funds for middle income Oregonians. For years, I think it's been fairly easy to serve the lowest income students, the students who qualify for Pell. We have some ability to put together at least a reasonable financial aid package that might meet some of their costs or many of their costs. But it was the students that just fell off that Pell Grant chart. So middle income students with expected family contributions of $6,000 to $15,000, that all they're getting is a student loan offer and whatever else the college might offer them. And those families just don't have the resources to pay for college. And so Oregon Promise, started filling that gap. I know it's skewed certainly to the higher expected family contribution folks. So maybe it needs some additional massaging there to figure it out. But if we can get the Oregon Opportunity Grant to expand to those middle EFCs, the people who have significant need when they're looking at a four-year public or four-year independent college, I mean, their unmet need is met in 5-digit figures. It's often 4 digits at the community college. There's significant needs before they can actually enroll and succeed in school. So I love that concept that we're finally getting beyond just Pell, and we need to be able to get there and sustain it. So thanks so much for the opportunity to speak with you, and I'll turn it over to Maggie.
Thank you. Welcome, Maggie. Please go ahead.
Thanks. Good afternoon, Chair Cross, Vice Chair Rowe, and committee members. For the record, my name is Maggie Gates, and I am the Legislative Director with the Oregon Student Association. So first off, I wanted to express my gratitude for the HEC staff and all of their diligent work to improve our financial aid structure in Oregon. And it's been a real pleasure to participate in the work group and learn from so many folks who are working with students directly on this and have been working in financial aid for a long time. And it's been really great to be able to bring the student voice to that group. So I just appreciate the opportunity to be here today. So I wanted to start out with just kind of acknowledging another process that's going on in the state right now. The legislature's Underrepresented Student Success Task Force that is currently going around the state and hearing from students on whatever issues they are facing on achieving success in higher education. And I've been at all of these hearings and the roundtables and whatnot, and I've been keeping track in my notebook on how many students bring up financial insecurity of some sort or financial aid. And really, it's every single student, almost every single student brings this up. This is the common thread that ties together every single different types of students' experience, whether they're a pipeline student, they're a student parent, they're first generation, a student of color. Everyone is bringing up this issue of financial aid, and it's whether they have, received the Oregon Promise or the Oregon Opportunity Grant, and it has been a deciding factor in whether they stay in school or they didn't get it. Kind of like Ryan was saying, there's so many students who fall through the cracks when their family is more middle income. So it really has been a common theme, and I really urge the commission to go and listen to the student testimonies that are all on OLIS that are really powerful and helps kind of ground you and why this work is so important, because really hearing what students are going through every day really shows how important this issue is, and that affordability really should be the #1 priority. So to kind of expand on that and talk a little bit more on why this is a #1 issue for students. Something that we kind of talk about a lot at OSA is how funding financial aid is one of those solutions that fixes a myriad of other issues, right? So when you get money into student hands, that improves their ability to go out and seek the mental health care that they need, have food to nourish their brain and be able to learn, to pay for their rent, which is like $1,500 on average in Portland right now. and get the books they need to succeed, all of that. So funding financial aid is really something that impacts all the issues that students have in higher ed. And what I really want to stress is that, you know, we've talked about how there's been some incremental increases to financial aid funding over the past, you know, decade or so. That's really not enough. Like what we saw from the HEC staff earlier, those big numbers, they're scary, but they aren't coming out of thin air. Like, this is really based on the need. And it's important to, when you're looking at those numbers, not just say, okay, those are big numbers, that's scary, yikes. No, these are human beings. Like, each and every student needs this money to be able to achieve their degree. And if we genuinely want to be able to go into elementary schools, as we've been talking about, middle schools, high schools, especially in low income and communities of color, and say, hey, the state is going to support you when you go to higher education. Right now, we can't really say that to those folks, like, honestly. So we need to have that transformational, bold investment into these programs to be able to do that in the future. And that really is the future that we are envisioning, and that students are fighting for, and are really not just wanting, but needing to be successful. Yeah, so kind of just going, I could talk about this all day, so I'm going to try to keep it like as brief as possible. But yeah, one of the key awarding questions that Juan pointed out in that great document that their staff put together is what the financial aid should be extending to. And we are really strong advocates for expanding financial aid to books, fees, and supplies. So that first number that you saw, because it really would make all the difference for students to have that additional funding beyond tuition, because tuition is really just scratching the surface. And all of those fees, they really add up. I was talking to a student the other day who was telling me that, you know, he receives the Oregon Opportunity Grant and the Pell, and every single quarter he has a bill from the university of $600, $700, you know, a quarter. And that is significant. And that can really, you know, be the difference between staying in school and dropping out. So it really is so key that we think about those additional costs. And beyond just those costs, you know, with the pandemic and the skyrocketing cost of living and inflation, students are really struggling to meet their basic needs. And I really appreciated Jim's quote earlier of students don't attend school to apply for financial aid. That is absolutely true. And right now, students are putting in so much time and so much labor scrounging around to find low interest loans or scholarships, family support, family sacrifice often, because we talk about, you know, family support, but, you know, for some students, it really means their family is sacrificing a lot for them to be there, or they're working multiple jobs while trying to attend school full time and keep their head above water. And it really shouldn't be that hard to get an education. So we want our students to be able to thrive, not just, you know, have their head bobbing above water. And to do that, we really need that $700 to $900 million, and we should fight for that. And we should say that is the standard, and that's what we're going to push for, because that is really what the need is. Yeah, so I guess just to kind of close out, we're absolutely supportive of all of the reforms that have been talked about today, dropping the GPA requirement. As we know, there are all sorts of reasons why, you know, students don't have a great GPA in high school, or maybe they don't even know that they need to have a great GPA in high school. One of our top student leaders at OSA, she was talking to me the other day about how growing up as, you know, in a family of immigrants and in a high school where not a lot of kids went to college there, that it wasn't like common knowledge that you had to have a good GPA to get into school. So why would we set up that barrier for students to be able to get the financial support they need to do that, just because of something as trivial as a GPA? That is not a good factor to consider when students are looking for support. So yeah, also the tiered approach is great. Funding students with the highest need is incredibly important and the number one priority for us. But what I kind of want to just leave you all with is that students are really struggling, and we really need to step it up as a state and show up for them. And let's try to work together. And I'm happy to show up to as many meetings as it takes to keep pushing this as a number one issue. And I really want to work with y'all to fight for a future where cost is not a barrier to attending higher education. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Maggie. Do we have one more speaker, Juan?
Yes, Madam Chair, we have Nancy Drummond with Warner Pacific University in Portland.
Good. Welcome, Nancy. And after this, I'd like to save some time for the commissioners to discuss overall this issue and its relative importance.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Chair Cross. I apologized. My computer failed right at the moment I was supposed to speak. So I'm on a different computer and we're just making it work. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm grateful for the opportunity to share a little with you and grateful for the opportunity to support this excellent work that's being done by our advisory council. I come from maybe not the typical private university. We have 50 to 60% of our students receiving Pell Grant, 40 to 45% receive Oregon Opportunity Grant, and that's across both of our main student populations. We're about half traditional age pipeline or transfer from community college students, and the other half are adult learners or other non-traditional learners. We have a really high percentage of DACA and undocumented students who attend our university, and we're grateful for the rich environment that all of these different blends bring to our university community. But as Maggie put it so well, tuition and books and fees, it's just the tip of the iceberg. At the current funding levels, there are a lot of gaps. Some of the biggest gaps are right where the Pell Grant cuts off. We have this drop off where students are still receiving, thankfully, some opportunity grant this year, but they have lost their Pell eligibility above that 6,200 mark and yet still lack the resources to effectively fund their education. Between that 6,200 and 7,500 EFC, we see a lot of retention issues because they do kind of fall off of a cliff as far as funding goes. Another place where we see a lot of funding issues, and this is where I'm an advocate for Promise extending to our university, we see students coming out of community colleges having had that wonderful funding that Promise provides. And when they come to a university with the goal of finishing that four-year degree, we find that they feel like they just don't have any funding available to them. They see the price tag, their families see the price tag, and as much as we try to keep our costs low, we find that those students say, this is not affordable, and they walk away from the chance to break some of these cycles of generational poverty and some of these cycles of a lack of education that have limited their families across the generations. We serve about 35% first-gen learners. And because of that, we see a lot of families that, as Maggie put very eloquently, they don't have the knowledge coming in to understand what to do to prepare for college. They don't realize that scholarship cycles operate 9 to 12 months out. They don't realize the importance of GPA. They don't realize a lot of the pieces that maybe students who are not coming from a first generation background would seem to think were common sense. So the opportunity to fund these students more effectively through some of these increases is really priceless as far as what it will mean for their contributions to our state in the future. I think it's one thing to say these numbers are too large, we need to go back to the drawing board and cut them down. But I'm telling you, it's a totally different experience when you have a single mom sitting in your office trying to decide, does she take a break from school so she can keep a roof over her kids' heads? or does she stay in school and move her kids into a shelter? There's no choice there. Obviously, you're going to take care of your children. And yet right now, especially for private institutions and the other 4 years, our hands are tied in a big way because for a lot of these students, we don't have any additional funding that we can offer them. We also have DACA students that will come and sit in my office, and they've proven themselves over and over again. And yet without any federal aid, college is just an unachievable dream. Many of them just cannot afford the price tag of finishing a 4-year degree. I had the privilege of serving on our Adult Learner Advisory Committee as well, and I learned a lot on that about state attainment goals. And as I look at our 40-40-20 goals for the 2025 year, I think they're great, and I would love to see those goals become realities. But I think that can't happen unless we effectively financially scaffold these students and give them the foundation that they need financially to take the financial worries off the table so that they can focus on the academics and degree completion. Because we all know that money is a major stressor. I mean, you know it, I know it, we all feel it, at least from time to time. These students feel it every single day. And when they're focused on the anxiety that comes from a lack of funding, they're not able to focus on and be successful in their academics. So when we fund a student, we're doing more than just allowing them to attend school. We are actually handing them an opportunity to be fully focused on gaining the knowledge that's going to make a difference for their future. So I would urge you to support this. I'm highly in support of this, and I have loved the opportunity to work with Director Baez-Aravalo and the rest of the team as we engaged in this good work and determined some of the ways that we can support our students as they achieve their dreams.
Thank you very much. And thank you to all of our speakers and guests. It really helps to hear your testimony and your perspective and the contacts you've had with students. And the needs that are specific to the students in your schools. So we really appreciate that. I want to open it up in the time we have left before a break. I'd like to hear, going back to Ramona's initial charge to us on the relative importance of things. These are big numbers, and we've seen through the testimony there are a lot of gaps, there's a lot of uncertainty. I mean, even without adding to the program, there are all these things that need to be fixed. But I would like to hear relative to other needs, and as this budget comes together more, I'd like to hear commissioners' views, please, on the relative importance of pushing this as hard as we can, and perhaps some thoughts on how hard you think we can or should push it.
Chair Rose, this is Commissioner
Yes,
Hayman.
thank you, Mr. Heyman, go ahead.
I'm grateful for the opportunity to do this. Thank you very much. I think there are a lot of ways in which we hope to be able to improve equitable outcomes for the students that we serve in the state. I believe that a well-designed and well-funded financial aid program is the most effective way in which we can accomplish that goal. I think funding a need-based model for financial support of our students is and will prove to be the most effective way in which we could close the success and achievement gaps that we see in the students that we currently serve, and those that we're not able to serve simply because they're not able to actually enter our doors because of their current financial circumstances. So I'd be glad, I don't need to go into more detail, but I think this should be amongst our highest priorities. So,
thank you. Commissioner Ayers-Probowski or Commissioner Gillard, either one?
Sure, I concur with Greg. It should be our highest priority. I mean, the financial obstacles that students face, students and their families, whether you're an 18-year-old or an 88-year-old, perhaps, but whoever they are, we want them, we need them. We, the state of Oregon, we Oregon's employers. We, Oregon's higher ed institutions, for the betterment of the institution and their communities. So definitely the OOG, as well as the Oregon Promise Grant as well. We need to be asking, requesting, and making the case. I mean, Greg Heyman puts it so well over and over. I mean, the students count. That's why we're here, to serve our students. That's why I've been teaching for 41 years. I'll make that 44 years in K through 16 in the state of Oregon. Here for the students. Those little kindergartners I used to teach with the parachute game and the scooters, those are great in the PE, in the gymnasium, I mean. Or, you know, statistics and calculus and business math and algebras that I have been teaching at PCC for so many years. It's all for the students. I'm just a servant. We, all of us in the room, should be servants. I know there's a few students in the room. We serve you, students. So, yeah, that should be our case. And legislators just need to hear it, take it to heart, and go with it. Push it. So thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Chair Rowe, thanks for asking. I fully agree with the statements that we have to really step up and step into what it is that we're going to put forward as our investment into our future for Oregon. And as we're watching so closely everything that is happening right now financially, there are a lot of plays for families to live into where they think they're moving forward, they think they're prepared, and then life shifts. And we even see this with our students who are living off campus or living at home and commuting into the campus, and the price of gas, and they didn't factor that in as they started this year or this term. So I fully support really making that investment from the Oregon side into our future, into our students' future, and to really committing that that's one of the greatest priorities we have, is to help with those equity gaps, to help students realize their potential, and to help them fully understand that the numbers may look and feel so scary, especially for our first-gen students, but we are here for you, and we got this. And there's no better message than being able to show them, as we give them their portfolios of all the things they're going to qualify for, just how much we are there for them.
Thank you. Chair Cross?
Yeah, I concur with my colleagues. I think that this is an important piece. I really commend the staff for putting together this package. It's when you can increase the benefit, and it looks to me like there'll be a good cost savings administratively, because this looks like a much easier package to administer from the financial aid officer point of view. And that makes it easier to communicate about, makes it easier to distribute materials about. And we've all talked about the growing dilemma of enrollment, and the need to somehow counterbalance the expanding cost of higher education, and this is a real good step in the right direction. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, staff and Juan, Ramona, and our university and college guests and partners, you've heard these commissioners on its priority and our complete faith in the staff and the staff work that is being done. If in going forward with this budget, in order to push this and make sure it is one of our, and remains one of our very top priorities, if we need to make other trade-offs, then I think what you're hearing from your commissioners is that we'd like to see that. We realize that there might be finite dollars, but we want to see some of these problems solved. We want to see the continued progress on the commitments you have made, and we want to serve more students. So it is both a fill in the gaps and make it more predictable and expand it to the maximum extent you think we can. And I won't address this now, wait to the end, but I think that will also require or I'm assuming that will require that our university partners be closer to where we are to the staff recommendation, and that we would have more power if we share fully the recommendation and where it sits in the budget and its relative importance. So thank you very much. This is critical work, and you've got us. You've got us. Bring us a package that we can stand behind.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Okay, we're just about on time. Miracle. Okay, we're going to take a 15 or 14-minute break and come back at 3 o'clock. Thank you very much, everyone.